When we think of 4X games, we mostly think of Civilization. But for the last decade, another studio has embodied this genre of turn-based strategy, establishing their reputation as one of the best in this market. Ears all perk up at the mention of Amplitude Studios. And last year, this studio that brought us Endless Legend and Endless Space has delivered HUMANKInd, their self-described magnum opus, a crowning work that explores humanity's growth from our nomadic tribal roots to the spacefaring civilization we know today, all bundled into the studio's latest refinement of the 4X turn-based strategy formula. In this video, we'll take a look at this ambitious title and how it innovates the genre, analyze its merits and discuss its faults, and look back on all of its content 1 year after its launch. This is HUMANKInd, a year in review. Amplitude Studios are a French development studio notable for producing a variety of 4X games. The entirety of their catalogue before HUMANKInd were games dubbed within their so-called Endless series, renowned for an inclusion of a compelling overarching narrative that set the foundations for the studio's vision of a shared grand universe. Their first title, Endless Space, was released in 2012 and sees players lead one of 12 unique spacefaring factions for dominance over a fictional galaxy set in the year 3000 AD, tens of thousands of years after the extinction of an advanced galactic civilization called the Endless. This was followed up with 2014's Endless Legend, a more fantasy-oriented take on the lore that takes place on the fictional world of Auriga, a location of a pivotal battle that resulted in the extinction of the race of Endless. In 2017, Endless Space 2 launched as a sequel to the first title, bridging some unanswered questions of the lore, such as who the Endless were, what technologies they were capable of, and where the story of humanity fits into this narrative. All three games were received positively, but nevertheless gathered only a small and niche audience you'd expect out of an indie dev, but they were heavily lauded for their immersive world building and procedurally generated storytelling, all while featuring a fresh take on the formulaic 4X gameplay structure that still lets players explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate, whether that be across the galaxy or a fantasy planet. Thanks to the relative success of these games and a clear studio identity, Amplitude were acquired by Sega to join their active development division, Sega Europe, which also features Total War devs Creative Assembly and Company of Heroes devs Relic Entertainment. With this caliber of backing and their advancement from otherwise humble indie backgrounds, Amplitude set to work on their defining breakout title, a 4X game that will explore HUMANKInd's history from our earliest steps to our most recent leaps. HUMANKInd launched in August of 2021 for the PC and will see a release on consoles later this year in November. It released to a select few raving reviews from critics, but despite strong sales from an extensive marketing campaign, has not really improved past its mixed user score on Steam or Metacritic over the past year. Since its launch, it has featured 2 new DLCs, and thus this video will cover all the playable content with the base game and deluxe version, the Cultures of Latin America pack, and the Cultures of Africa pack. HUMANKInd attempts to develop an open-ended, multiculturally encompassing journey for the player that allows them to create their own custom civilization by amalgamating together several historical cultures. Thus, there is no inclusion of a shared universe with the Endless series, and I think this is the most important point to make from the outset. This is frankly just not an Amplitude Endless game, but must be judged as its own pseudo-historical civilization title, with a basis on the cultures, wonders, and peoples of our world and our history. There is, however, an official Endless Lore mod for the game that attempts to bridge Humankind with the Endless series. We'll cover this later in the video. As with other 4X games, there's really only one game mode. You either play against other players, the AI, or any combination of the two. There are the typical parameters you expect when setting up a 4X game. You can change how many competitors, which AI personalities, and the difficulty. The map can be varied in size, terrain, weather, continent shapes, continent numbers, etc, etc. The pace of the game not only sets a turn limit, it also scales the game's speed. For instance, a slower pace setting will increase the resources required and thus the turns needed to build districts and units, so progression for everyone will be of a slower rate. But there is always an option to keep playing past the turn limit if you do so desire. Here is where players can set their end conditions as well, choosing the parameters that dictate when victory will be called for one competitor or another.
A race begins.
When the game finally begins is where Humankind breaks typical 4X tradition. You'll notice we didn't select a starting culture or a faction. That's because at the beginning of the game everyone starts as a nomadic tribe in the Neolithic era. As player factions grow and expand, they'll slowly advance through the eras. This is the main form of progression in Humankind, as empires will unlock more technologies, which subsequently unlocks more buildings and units that scale harder and faster to facilitate the 4X formula for exploration, expansion, exploitation, and ultimately extermination. To advance to later eras, empires must accomplish specific milestones that provide era stars, and depending on the game parameters, must acquire a certain number of era stars in order to advance to the next era and be able to select a new culture. At each stage of era advancement, empires can select a new culture to adopt or transcend the current one they already play as. Each culture has their own strengths, emblematic districts, and units. So, uniquely in Humankind, you are not limited to the same culture the entire game, although you can still continue as one for as long as you see fit. You can switch from playing as the Egyptians in the ancient era to something completely different, such as the Romans in the classical era, and end the game as the contemporary Australians. This allows for min-maxing, where you can choose which culture will benefit your current game state and agenda, or you can roleplay, picking cultures that are historical successes. For instance, if you are role-playing a Mesopotamic civilization, you could start as the ancient Babylonians. You could then advance to the classical era with the Achaemenid Persians, then the medieval Umayyads, the early modern Ottomans, the industrial Persians. You sort of get the picture. This ability to switch to different cultures presents a unique selling point of Humankind, one that provides player agency to adapt and adjust to in-game developments, as well as tons of flavor, as cultures historically rose and fell, rather than the static entities other games in the 4X genre tend to portray. And if you made a particularly bad culture choice, well, there's always the next era. The ultimate goal of Humankind is to transcribe your civilization into the annals of history by accruing a resource called fame. The highest fame at the end of the game wins the game. This is mostly accomplished by obtaining era stars, so advancing faster than other empires is a surefire way to take the lead in matches, but Humankind rewards empires that try to stand out. Fame, for instance, can also be gained from constructing wonders, magnificent districts that bring about massive empire-wide bonuses, but also cement your civilization's legacy. We'll cover more in the gameplay section. Certain achievements, such as being the first empire to conquer an entire continent, will also provide a nice one-time boon of fame. These are known as competitive deeds and can be contested by all players over the course of the game. The end of the game is determined by a set of conditions which can be customized in the game setup. By default, the game will end in a set number of turns dependent on the pacing settings of the game, but can be triggered earlier if an empire attains every era star in the final era, if they complete the tech tree, if they conquer or vassalize all other empires, or if they are the first empire to complete the Mars colonization project. The key difference is that triggering these end conditions does not equate to winning the game. The game will cease when these conditions are met, but the empire with the highest fame still gets the victory. So there's no arbitrary science or religion or military victory like in other 4X games. Ultimately, it's not about how fast you can win, it's about how your civilization will be remembered. The entirety of the game is played on a ridiculously detailed world map, which based on the game parameters can be any number of procedurally generated randomness, although custom maps do exist and can be downloaded as mods. Like many other 4X titles, Humankind's map is separated into a grid of hexagons, each hex denoting a particular type of terrain that can be exploited and built upon. All manner of biomes from mountains and deserts, prairies and forests, rivers, inland lakes and special localities all provide a diverse landscape with a variety of exploitatable resources, whilst cliffs and ridges dictate unit movement and make long-term strategy and city location impactful. Although players can build cultural wonders, there also exists a random assortment of natural wonders and famous landmarks that can spawn in the world, and these are slowly but surely discovered as the game progresses, providing a pleasing sense of exploration. It's really nothing new, rather more expected out of a 4X game these days, but it's nice that Humankind at least pitches an interesting 4X playground for lovers of this genre. The endless amount of map parameter combinations with its procedurally generated system will consequently generate endless amounts of replayability with the sheer amount of culture variations and combinations the player has access to. This is backed up by Humankind's excelling in the visual department. I'm not sure what's the technical terminology for the anti-aliasing they apply, but the combination of smooth edges, rich color saturation and detailed models creates a very vibrant, almost romantic atmosphere that encapsulates Amplitude's tone for the game. There's also so many different type of buildings and district models as well, one for every culture in the game, for every type of building. And if you prefer to have some continuity, there's even a city project to change the aesthetic of the administrative capital to match the current culture in play. The user interface can get a bit clunky, perhaps even daunting sometimes, but overall it is clean, translucent, modern and seems to deliver enough information, if at times a little too much information. We'll make references to the UI as we covered it in greater detail in tandem with gameplay elements later on in the video. This is backed by a bubbly art style that features plenty of immersive artworks and cutscenes that try to paint a storytelling feel to your playthrough. The existence of a sarcastic, deadpan narrator is a nice touch to the game's own bubbly charm. I think this is a response to Sean Bean's grandiose commentary in Civilization 6, which added a lot of his gravitas to a tone of majesty and awe in that game. But the witty panache of Humankind's narrator paints a less serious, more fun, adventurous tone.
Congest, and railroads bring distant goods to the doorstep. Anything seems possible in this wondrous future. Though as humankind grows, the planet itself appears to shrink.
The narrator, whose name escapes me because I can't seem to find a definitive answer on who he is, always has a witty remark to every achievement the player seems to make or how the game is progressing, constantly making a mockery of empire and civilization building. And at the end of the day, it's not the strongest or longest empire that will be revered, but it's the one that has the most style. Well, probably. Human narration aside, Humankind is backed up by one of the most indulgent and ambitious strategy game soundtracks to date. A massive project entailing more than 1.5 hours of orchestral goodness in its official soundtrack and 6 volumes of background tracks within its Music for the Ages albums. The latter are composed of cultural specific ambience that play depending on the player's current culture. Of course, that's a lot of music to cover all the events that unfold for the more than 60 cultures in the game, and it's no wonder that all the music has to be packaged separately into their own bundle on Steam. Many of these tracks are featured in the background music for this video. Humankind is overall framed within a neat and refined audio-visual package, but despite the game being built on the usually well-optimized Unity engine, Humankind can get pretty demanding as you progress up the quality settings. Fortunately, the highest setting, or Fantastic, is not much of an upgrade, so this is a perfect example of a game that doesn't need to be fully maxed out to enjoy. I highly encourage also limiting the frame rate, as this game does tend to push your GPU to the limit, often causing stuttering on multi-monitor setups. Stability-wise, however, the game has pretty much never crashed on me, although there are certain instances where you can get soft-locked, such as when issuing a lot of battle commands at once. I recommend to just have autosave on so you can reload your last turn in these situations. Not exactly sure what causes this. Humankind at its core is still a turn-based 4X game, but with a few unique twists that upend the usual gameplay loop of a 4X into a better strategic package worth considering. How much better? Well, you have to decide that for yourself, but we'll analyze the major gameplay derivations in this section of the video. It's first important to note the overarching resource system in Humankind is essentially not so different from other 4X games. It's called the FIM system, and it's an acronym for Food, Industry, Money, and Science, which are the four major exploitable resources. Cities and outposts exploit the 6 hexes immediately around them, and constructible districts further expand this exploitable area. A surplus of food grows population, industry is spent into city projects, money is used to pay for a variety of purchases, while science is invested into the tech tree. This is where the different types of terrain across the map matter. A city built near prairies and rivers will be able to take advantage of the fertile region to produce a lot of food, for instance. Also scattered across the map, and depending on game parameters, are various luxury and strategic deposits, harboring rare resources that are critical to your civilization's survival and progression through the ages. Luxuries are particularly valuable as they provide stability and bonuses to other major resources in the FIM system, while strategic resources are required to unlock certain units and infrastructure projects. The other major resource is influence, and it's used for mostly city or civic related purchases. Influence is accrued by populations passively or through certain districts. Sounds pretty familiar so far with many other 4X games, right? One of Humankind's unique features is immediately apparent in the starting era. Every player and AI begin the game as a nomadic tribe culture within the Neolithic era, albeit in a random part of the world map. A representation of humanity's common hunter-gatherer lineages, this era is denoted by players controlling self-sufficient hunting parties that explore the map, hunting wild animals and collecting food to grow their tribe, or discovering curiosities that provide influence and science. The purpose of this era is to scout the surrounding terrain and assess potential establishment sites for outposts and cities. But conversely, it also helps to get out of this era as quickly as possible, as selecting cultures is essentially on a first-come, first-served basis, and any empire able to set up a city faster than their opponents can begin to build an advantage. During the Neolithic era, however, cities cannot be built yet, but tribes can create outposts. Here we arrive at yet another one of Humankind's unique 4X derivation, its territory system. You'll notice the map is separated into these bordered parcels of land. These are known as territories and are randomly generated for each game's world map. An outpost built on any one of these territories immediately exudes control over the entire territory, no matter its location inside the territory. It goes without saying that there can only be one outpost built in any territory at any given time, so choosing a strategic location that is highly defensible or close to resources is key. The game has a handy UI feature here to show you where the most lucrative outpost positions are. As more and more outposts are constructed, more and more territories claimed, the price of influence required is increased, so late game expansion is often hindered by an empire's influence production. Empires can also militarily conquer already established territories from the enemy. We'll explore this later. Only beginning in the Second Era, the Ancient Era, outposts can then be converted to cities. An empire's first city is free, but later cities will cost influence to upgrade from outposts. Cities perform the typical functions of population and production centers within a 4x format. They exploit the surrounding terrain, gathering all the available resources of the surrounding hexes. Importantly, they allow the production of buildings, units, and districts by using industry. Pops grow within cities and require food upkeep, however will keep growing as long as there is surplus food. Pops can then be assigned across the FIM system where needed. Posting more pops as farmers further improves the food supply, or assigning them as scientists may help with researching tech more quickly. Districts can also be built to enhance the city's exploitation of the surrounding FIMs. A farmer's quarter, for instance, improves the current food yield on the immediate hex tile, but also further increases the exploitation reach of the city. Attaching another adjacent farmer's quarters will likewise extend the reach, but also provide an additive effect to the already constructed quarter. I find the UI's strength in displaying information extremely useful here. In this clip, I try to expand a commercial hub for my city with interlocking market quarters. I can see exactly where the most lucrative positions are. Another unique feature in Humankind is the ability to attach outposts to cities. Instead of actively converting every outpost to a full-fledged city, their territories and associated resources can instead be funneled into a parent city to improve overall yield and productivity whilst keeping micromanagement of cities to a minimum. From the mid-game onwards with the military architecture technology, cities can also absorb other cities completely. Often these two mechanics are necessary because there is a maximum cap of cities empires can field at one time, lest they receive a significant influence penalty. This cap increases with certain tech, but it's usual for empires to have only 3 or 4 cities by the late game, yet exert their control over a vast swath of territories, as each city will in turn be attached to 3 or more minor outposts. In this system, you can start to see how the game rewards city specialization, allows for adaptation whilst promoting long-term town planning. Cities can attach fertile, rich outposts if they're having trouble with food production, or science-rich terrain features can be attached and exploited to build a dedicated metropolis for knowledge. However, Humankind also features a city-specific resource called stability. As cities grow with more districts, as they attach or absorb more territory, their stability will begin to fall. High stability allows each pop in the city to generate more influence, whilst increasing the chances of positive randomized events. Low stability potentially causes unrest and pops can rebel, while cities will also refuse to construct infrastructure. Building various districts, wonders, construction projects, or implementing moderate laws helps to provide stability and allow cities to grow without the negative effects associated. This is essentially a progression check mechanic to limit empire expansion and must be managed adequately. Each culture offered at each era stage has unique modifiers that help to conform to a certain strategy. This is probably Humankind's most unique feature in its 4x gameplay loop, as the ability to choose a different culture every era reduces the monotony of carrying one singular flavor profile through the entire game. Cultures are separated into affinity groups or gameplay orientations they gravitate towards. For instance, the agrarian cultures such as the Harappans or the English have some sort of food buffing trait or mechanic which makes it exceptionally easier to grow populations. Militarist cultures such as the Goths, the Mongols or the Germans always have some adherence towards buffing combat units. Every time you select that culture, their cultural trait will persist throughout the entire game. It never overwrites, so you can build as min-max or as broad and flexible as you want over the course of the game. Each culture also feature their own emblematic buildable district and a military unit. Districts are often overtuned to provide a benefit befitting the culture's affinity, and unique units provide a powerful but flavorful component to build regiments around. Whereas emblematic districts can only be built while as the current culture, they will persist through the ages and provide their benefits over the course of the entire game. Emblematic units are available to recruit indefinitely, though like all other units they generally will become obsolete. One of the great adaptations of Humankind is its take on cultural wonders. These are powerful districts that require immense industrial investment over many turns, and can be simultaneously constructed across any city in the Empire. Once completed, they provide a worthy boon of fame, stability, and a powerful modifier for the constructor. There are only a limited select amount of wonders available to construct per era, and players must first spend influence to claim the rights to build them, kind of like an auction house. As a result, the system is a first come, first served basis, and as such, some empires can build multiple wonders, some may miss out on them altogether, for any given era. For instance, in an early part of a game where I played as the ancient Egyptians and onto the Garamantians, I was able to claim 4 wonders by the classical era, a feat I was able to accomplish by focusing heavily on influence production. There's also a pretty deep ideological system within Humankind that attempts to reflect the pragmatic, lawmaking and socio-political developments that occur over a civilization's lifespan. There are 4 different ideological branches with 8 different positions empires can have a stance upon. For instance, the economy axis is divided between the collectivism wing versus the individualism wing, each axis providing a different bonus to the empire. These axis positions are however not arbitrarily chosen, but they are influenced by the player's decisions over the course of the game. To represent the judicial and lawmaking system of empires, the civics mechanic represents the societal matters and dilemmas that the player directs their ideology towards. For instance, players can choose their position on leadership within their empire, either fostering a power play in autarky, which improves city stability, or encouraging small councillorship, which increases the city cap and offers an expansionist route forward. Or on the composition of armies, conscripts can improve the speed at which units churn out, but professionalism improves their overall efficiency in combat. As empires age, these civic tendencies can be subject to reform. Sometimes it is more prudent to change an archaic law because it simply doesn't serve its intended purpose any longer. Humankind also features various narrative events that will force the player to adopt a position on a certain issue, related to the 4 ideological branches. The player's choice will skew the ideology of the entire empire a slight nudge. These events start appearing almost as soon as the player reaches the ancient era, posing a question on how inheritance should be handled, for instance. Later, a foreign board game is introduced to the empire, bringing with it an ominous prophecy. Whether the game is condemned, the issue overlooked, or the prophecy heeded produces different immediate results, but it also nudges the long-term ideological direction ever so slightly. Overall, this entire ideological system can be used as a prerogative for the player to mold their journey towards their ideal political stance, but players can also employ a moderate approach by riding a centrist agenda, which provides in itself a stability modifier for cities. I feel like this is an area often overlooked in the 4X genre, as ideology is just not a fundamental part of the 4X formula. Humankind has one of the best representations for a pragmatic portrayal of ideological growth, a sense of realpolitik that gives much player agency in forging their own destiny. Differing ideologies close to each other can trigger osmosis events, forcing dilemmas on players to change their empire's civics to improve their ideological proximity, or refuse to staunchly defend your own ideology at the expense of stability. Science osmosis can also occur, providing opportunities to buy out advanced technologies or receive one-time boosts of free science when bordering empires that have researched a technology you do not possess. This is a representation of technological spread through different empires. Following this same design, the religious system is also predicated on a pragmatic, evolutionary approach where tenets and beliefs are added upon as a religion spreads and its followers grow in number. Often players will start out with a particular religion in mind, for it to morph into something almost entirely different by the game's end. At the beginning of the game, all Neolithic tribes practice some form of animism, but an official religion can then be founded when a player reaches a population of 10. Initially, the choice is between polytheism or shamanism, but the religion can be morphed into one of humanity's historical religious templates. Playing the Chinese Zhou dynasty, for instance, I thought it flavorful to adopt Taoism. Every time your religion reaches a milestone in follower count, you can select a new tenet which provides a strong bonus empire-wide. Here, the first tenet of Taoism is decreed to be as virtuous as water, providing +2 stability on all river tiles. And as long as the other religions aren't claimed, you can still eventually switch to them. In my timeline, Taoism eventually evolved into Buddhism in early modern Edo Japan, decreeing a purge of idleness in the meantime as its new tenet. Through the construction of holy sites, which are also shared projects like Wonders, a player's religion generates a resource called faith. Every tenet supplemented into the religion will increase the holy site cap, so as a religion grows, so does its overall production of faith. This determines the passive spread of religions to foreign territories. The more faith a religion produces, naturally the more evangelical it becomes. Although there is no win con that involves religious domination, it is a powerful tool in relation to diplomacy, as opposing religions can cause grievances which are very easy attainable causes for war. Empires can switch their religion as well if they are overpowered by an external religious faith and prefer those tenets to their own, or just invoke secularism or state atheism to ignore the religious mechanics altogether and add completely new ones to play with.
This certainly has the advantage of clarity.
Diplomacy in Humankind at first seems really nothing too revolutionary from other 4X games. Diplomacy between empires are initiated when one meets the other's units or scouts their borders or territories.
Upon you the wonder of my people, and tell you my ambitions, no? Nay.
Life is wonderful, is it not? Treat me and my people with respect, and all will be well.
Their relations can be improved or hampered, treaties can be signed, disputes resolved, or wars declared in the respective section of the UI. Diplomacy is an especially powerful tool for trade. With a corresponding trade agreement and some money, empires can trade certain valuable resources, making it possible for diplomatic savvy negotiators to import all their luxury and strategic needs instead of exploiting it themselves. Humankind features a diplomatic crisis management system to alleviate geopolitical issues between foreign powers. Any slight or issue between empires forms a grievance. These can be renounced to improve relations or pushed to become a demand, to hopefully force a positive resolution for your own empire. As grievances accumulate and demands be refused, opposing powers begin accruing domestic war support. This represents the population's fervour for war against the respective faction. The baseline is 50 and war can be declared if war support is above 80. Fighting a war is thus an objective to bring your opponent's war support down to 0, which will force the enemy to sue for peace. Peace negotiations are pretty simple. Either one side surrenders with the other reaping their choice of spoils from the demands that they have set previously, or it's a white peace. In any case, after peace is signed, the warring factions will have their war support set at 0, essentially mitigating another war for a while.
Most gracious thanks.
Your transgressions anger me. You must pay for my goodwill.
So this is a good place to talk about how warfare is portrayed in Humankind. And Amplitude Studios have once again splashed their own take onto the typical 4X turn-based battle formula. The first major differentiation is that individual units can be combined into grouped formations and moved around the map as single entities. This reduces map clutter and micromanagement, allowing players to form regiments and initiate battles with a select formation of units. Battles, although still retaining the turn-based elements of other 4X games, are different in that these individual units are then deployed into a sub-map of the main world map. It's called a tactical map, and it copies the terrain features such as cliffs and rivers, but it's executed as a separate entity from the main turn-based gameplay loop. In this mode, land battles, naval battles, and even combined armed siege battles are performed, the attacking player receiving the first turn initiative. Once in this mode, it's quite self-explanatory really. Eliminate all the other units or capture and hold the enemy's flag. There are 3 combat rounds per player per turn. Units have a variety of individual strengths and weaknesses. Terrain is a factor, such as attacking from rivers, defending on high ground, outflanking, there are range attacks, etc, etc. Once the late game opens up, there will be even more mechanics at play, such as aircraft and cruise missiles to juggle with. It's by no means hugely different from other games, but the simple fact that units can be grouped together and led into battle as one formation, and that battles are played in a separate tactical space separated from the main map, just adds this extra layer of nuance to the whole affair. Despite this, one of Humankind's major criticisms is its unit balancing, especially range units, which are extremely fragile and do so little damage. This becomes a moot point when arquebusiers and musketeers are unlocked around the early modern period, but before then, it seems entirely worthless to invest in range units, which become essentially magnets for enemy cavalry. There is also a general weakness in naval gameplay, and subsequently cultures with naval affinity suffer. The lack of diverse sea tile resources and interaction with these hexes creates a diversion against expanding into coastal territories. It seems that this is a ripe area for expansion in an update or a DLC one day, but so far it's a blemish to the overall beautiful map design and culture diversity. However, the sharpest criticism that can be leveled against Humankind is that it's a very gameplay-oriented, surface-level strategy game with a lot of charm, a lot of mechanical depth, but not much narrative punch. It clearly suffers from a lack of a driving storytelling arc that defined Amplitude Studios' Endless series before this, which for their comparatively weaker gameplay elements, were able to at least keep my attention span way longer because of their deep and interesting lore. In Humankind, it's more of a make-your-own story, era by era. The late game is also an unfortunate slog. Because of how pacing scales, the majority of players will spend their time in the contemporary era. Here, battles are long and grindy. Progress is dependent on one super rare resource, oil, with each map only spawning about 3 or 4 deposits, and randomly as well. Some players will have immediate access and others must either fight or talk their way to it. Critical late game functions such as constructing virtually every unit and projects such as the space station will all require oil. I feel like this reduces the dynamic nature of Humankind into a grind fest. If you can't access oil, then you might as well GG, because there's no real way to progress without. Either finish the game before this or be ready to fight for oil. The late game is just not fun. Humankind's gameplay is a promising elevation of all the classic 4X tropes. Innovation is not revolutionary, but evolutionary. And as equally as 4X lovers will be able to quickly learn the interesting nuances and deeper mechanics, equally, it isn't as ambitious or game-changing as one might have liked or expected after the reputation that preceded Amplitude Studios and their extensive marketing campaign with Humankind. At the end of the day, I didn't get so much more wonder or amazement over other titles in this market space, such as Civilization. Ultimately, after the novelty wore off, the experiences were quite comparable. Like the pragmatic approach offered to players, the mechanics as a whole are a simile on how Humankind improves quality of life and implements incremental adjustments to tweak rather than dramatically change the 4X formula. The end result is a very refined and polished product, but ultimately, many may feel Humankind does not meet expectations from Amplitude's self-declared magnum opus, and should be rather described as a safe and conservative renovation of the genre. Humankind's progress over its 1 year post-release development has been mediocre for the most part. The game attracted sharp criticism at launch for instability and performance issues, which after a year have mostly improved, though not at the standard that one would hope. Humankind has featured 9 major updates since its launch last year. The last update, and coinciding with its 1 year anniversary, was the Ibn Battuta update. The game was in a very rough state at launch, with various issues such as hanging end turns, softlocks, crashes, and a host of balancing problems. Endgame condition customization was not introduced until the November Fabius Maximus update, and it wasn't until the January 2022, the Alan Newell update, named after a computer science researcher that produced 2 of the earliest AI programs, that fittingly produced an AI worth playing against. The AI before this was notoriously bad and almost laughable on even the highest difficulty settings. Free content has also been few and far between. Most notable was the free culture, the Mississippians, which came with the Bolivar update a few months ago. A cool addition, and the type of free content players of Humankind will appreciate, but there just hasn't been enough of this over the past year to really cement any sense of longevity. Further to the point, there have only been 2 official DLC packs, the Culture Packs for Africa and Latin America, released in January and June 2022 respectively. The Cultures of Africa pack features 1 African-based culture for every era, such as the Bantu, the Swahili, or the Ethiopians. It also features several natural wonders discoverable on the world map from the continent of Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro, Victoria Falls, Zuma Rock, to name a few. And it also includes the constructible cultural wonder, the Great Mosque of Djenné in the medieval era. The Cultures of Latin America pack features 1 culture per era as well. The Nazca, the Incans, and the Argentinians are some introduced. It also features a variety of natural wonders from Central and South America. Also featured are 2 new constructible cultural wonders, the Pyramid of the Sun and the Maracanã Stadium. It has taken upwards of 6 months each time for a DLC, and with the naming convention of this type of content as culture packs, one can presume Amplitude Studios may have more ambitious, substantially sized expansion packs in store for us in the future, although there's nothing that would indicate that so far. There also has been very little free content released, most of which has been free downloadable wonders such as the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion and the Great Zimbabwe, which can be downloaded by signing up to Amplitude Studios GamesTogether.com forums. Although Humankind lends itself to quite a unique state of replayability, 4X titles often have much DLC and free content associated with it, as games of this nature are essentially blank slates with an almost limitless amount of contextual history to draw from. Although the game is objectively much better than at launch, it certainly won't be turning heads anytime soon, and no major post-release development phase has salvaged its dire release reputation, because the simple fact is there hasn't been much new content in the first place to get players excited. Amplitude Studios have implemented the mod.io platform for Humankind, and as it stands, the game is one of the flagship titles for the platform, with in-game integration allowing browsing and organization of community-made mods. I still can't shake the feeling that Steam Workshop integration would have still been the cleaner and more accessible pathway here. Regardless, the modding scene is surprisingly large, with a host of overhaul and balancing mods that breathe some much needed content into the game. Frustratingly, game saves cannot be loaded if they use a previous version of a mod, so every time authors push out an update, the save is unplayable unless you manually install a rollback version. And there's no intuitive place to prevent auto-updating of mods, so this is quite a big issue that needs to be fixed or worked on for the future, as saves that persist through multiple updates are not even worth playing. Amplitude have also used the platform to release their own official Endless mod. This mod adds 32 narrative events and in-game civics, technologies and infrastructures to weave their famed universe from the other games into Humankind. It's not quite anything engrossing, but it's a nice nod to the series that made the studio famous. Unfortunately, it has its own host of issues, such as being pretty much incompatible with any other large-scale mod, so yeah, not a great execution regardless. Despite all these post-release issues, there's a sentiment that Amplitude will persist with Humankind for some time. Record initial sales may not have retained steady public interest over the past year, but may have given them enough funding to continue the project for some time. Their only other upcoming project is a smallish title, Endless Dungeon, that is more in line with their shared universe, so Humankind still seems like their largest ongoing project. I have a feeling we've yet to see the full potential of Humankind. Amplitude Studios presents a refreshing and refined title in the crowded 4X turn-based strategy market, one that allows for much replayability. Its emphasis on allowing the player to create their own sandbox Lego of cultures unfortunately misses out on Amplitude's greatest asset in adapting their endless universe. 7 out of 10. Stunning visuals and an ambitious soundtrack emphasize Amplitude's efforts in composing a breathtaking game for their so-called magnum opus, even if it probably runs like garbage for most of the PC player base. 8 out of 10. Humankind is virtually an improvement on every aspect of 4X turn-based strategy, but it's never really visionary enough to provide a truly gratifying experience that is worth supplanting others in its genre. 7 out of 10. The development after launch has been too gradual and too limited to provide any meaningful onus for new and returning players, to the point where Humankind's release reputation as a mediocre title still precedes it to this day. Modding potential is there but currently severely scuffed. 5 out of 10. I give Humankind a final weighted score of 7 out of 10. Humankind has maintained its retail price of $50 pretty consistently, and I think the game is fairly priced at slightly less than the standard $60 AAA benchmark. It has been on sale occasionally, with all of the major Steam sales seeing a price drop. The most recent Steam summer sale saw the largest drop at 33% discount for $33.49 US. The Digital Deluxe Upgrade pack features very little in-game content. What's there includes the Notre Dame Wonder and some avatars, I don't know. Most of the value will be found outside the game, the digital soundtrack and a poster. It's not recommended at all really. 2 out of 10. Both the culture packs offer virtually the same content. 6 brand new cultures adapted from their continental themes for each era in the game, as well as several new natural wonders and constructible cultural wonders. They are still decent DLCs, if a little bit uninspired, and one can only hope for richer, deeper content in Humankind's future. 6 out of 10, get them on sale. Despite its extensive marketing campaign for Amplitude Studios' biggest game to date, a studio that has so far excelled in a 4X market dominated by the Civilization series, this game has definitely not lived up to its expectations, even though it is inherently not a bad game and may even be perhaps currently underrated by the greater crowd at large. Perhaps it's wiser to judge Humankind in its own vacuum and give the title its own chance to shine away from the studio's storied and enchanting predecessors. But in the meantime, Humankind needs to mature and grow a little more. This was Humankind, a year in review. Thanks to our patrons for making this video possible. If you've enjoyed this video and want to support us further to fund more content like this, consider subscribing on Patreon for as little as $1 a month.